My ex-husband left me for his pregnant mistress and spent months telling everyone our marriage failed because I wasn't enough. A week after our divorce, he married her, moved into her wealthy family's world, and acted like he'd won. Then one night my phone rang. It was Tyler. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was gone. His newborn daughter didn't look like him. She didn't look like his wife either. A DNA test proved she was his child, but what he discovered next shattered the perfect life he had thrown me away for. My name is Evelyn Hartwell, and this revenge story isn't about getting even, it's about what happens when the truth finally catches up with people who spent years running from it. Chapter 1. I used to think that if two people loved each other enough, they could survive anything. Stress, long hours, financial pressure, bad seasons, every marriage had them. At least that was what I told myself whenever something felt off between Tyler and me. My name was Evelyn Hartwell. I was 38 years old, living just outside Denver, and working as a senior accounting coordinator for a medical supply company. From the outside, my life probably looked stable. I had a reliable job, a comfortable apartment, and a husband I had been married to for 11 years. The problem was that stability and happiness are not always the same thing. Tyler James Carter had not always been distant. There was a time when he called during lunch breaks just to hear my voice. A time when we stayed up talking until 2 in the morning because neither of us wanted the conversation to end. A time when he knew exactly how I took my coffee and never forgot. Somewhere along the way, that man disappeared. The changes were gradual enough that I ignored them. He started coming home later. Then later became normal. Then some nights he barely came home at all before I was asleep. Dinner used to be our time together. We would sit at the kitchen table and talk about work, friends, plans for the future. Now, most evenings, I ate alone while scrolling through my phone or watching TV I barely paid attention to. His plate was often untouched in the microwave. When I asked how work was going, he gave short answers. Busy. Long day. Nothing special. The conversations that once filled entire evenings now lasted less than a minute. His phone changed too. It was always face down, always locked, always within reach. Notifications appeared constantly, yet whenever I glanced in his direction, the screen was already dark. I noticed every detail. I simply refused to let myself draw conclusions because admitting something was wrong felt far more frightening than pretending everything was fine. I became an expert at making excuses for him. Maybe he was overwhelmed at work. Maybe he was exhausted. Maybe he was carrying responsibilities he did not want to discuss. Maybe he simply needed time. Every explanation sounded reasonable when I repeated it often enough. About a week before our anniversary, I texted Tyler a list of restaurants I thought we might enjoy. Nothing extravagant, just a few places we had talked about trying over the years. I spent longer choosing that list than I care to admit. His reply arrived nearly 3 hours later. "We'll see." That was all. No suggestion, no excitement, no follow-up, just 2 words. I remember standing in the grocery store parking lot staring at the screen. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Disappointment mixed with something else I did not want to name. Still, I convinced myself it meant nothing. Tyler had always been busy. Tyler had always been practical. Tyler was probably distracted. I slipped the phone back into my purse and drove home. The anniversary arrived on a Thursday. It was also Tyler's birthday. I took half a day off work because I wanted everything to be perfect. After leaving the office, I stopped by his favorite wine shop and bought a bottle he loved. Then I picked up a custom chocolate cake from a bakery downtown. After that, I made one final stop for ingredients. By late afternoon, I was home cooking. The atmosphere smelled of garlic, rosemary, and butter. Soft music played through a speaker in the kitchen while sunlight poured through the windows. For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful. Maybe tonight would remind us who we used to be. While setting the table, I found myself drifting into old memories. I remembered our first apartment. The furniture had been mismatched and cheap, but we had laughed constantly. I remembered the weekend Tyler proposed beside a mountain lake. He was so nervous he dropped the ring box into the dirt before opening it. I remember lying awake together after our wedding, talking about the future, children, travel, growing old together. Back then, I never doubted his love. Back then, I never questioned my place in his life. By 6:30, everything was ready. The wine was open, dinner was waiting. The balcony lights glowed softly outside. I checked my phone. Nothing. 7 o'clock arrived. I smiled to myself and assumed traffic was bad. 7:30 came and went. Still nothing. At 8 o'clock, I sent a text. "Hey, everything okay?" No reply. I waited another 15 minutes and called. The call went directly to voicemail. A knot formed in my stomach. At first, I told myself not to overreact, but the silence felt wrong. At 8:45, I called again. Voicemail. The optimism I had carried all day slowly began slipping away. I reheated dinner, then turned the oven off, walked into the living room, returned to the kitchen, checked my phone, repeated the same routine over and over. 9 o'clock passed. The food cooled again. The apartment felt strangely quiet. I stared at the empty chair across from mine and wondered when eating together had become so rare. Another text. No reply. 10 o'clock. I called again. Straight to voicemail. Now my thoughts were moving into darker places. Was he hurt? Had there been an accident? Why wasn't he answering? I tried to read a book. I managed one page. I tried watching TV. I could not focus. Every few minutes, I looked at my phone, waiting, hoping, listening for a notification. At exactly 10:35, the screen lit up. Relief hit me instantly. Finally. My fingers moved so quickly I nearly dropped the phone. It wasn't a text message. It was an email. "A client emergency came up. I have to stay at the office tonight." That was the entire message. No apology, no explanation, no mention of his birthday, no mention of our anniversary. Nothing. I read it once, then again, then a third time. The candles on the table had almost burned out. The food sat untouched. The cake remained inside its box. Hours of preparation suddenly felt meaningless. I lowered the phone and looked around the room. Every decoration, every plate, every effort, none of it had mattered enough for him to show up. For a long moment, I simply sat there, not angry, not crying, just empty, as though I had spent years carrying something by myself without realizing the other person had already let go. Just before midnight, I blew out the candles, cleaned the table, and carried the leftovers into the kitchen. The next morning before leaving for work, I searched for the phone number of Tyler's office and pressed call. Chapter 2. The line rang twice before someone answered. "Thank you for calling Summit Horizon Realty. This is Megan speaking. How may I help you today?" I tightened my grip on the phone. "Hi, I'm trying to reach Tyler Carter." There was a brief pause. "I'm sorry, Tyler no longer works here." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. "What do you mean he doesn't work there?" "He left the company earlier this week." Earlier this week? The words landed like a punch to the chest. I stared through the windshield of my car at the apartment parking lot outside my building. There must be some mistake. I spoke to him yesterday. He never mentioned leaving. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I only know he officially departed 3 days ago." 3 days? I thanked her automatically and ended the call. Then I just sat there. 3 days ago. Tyler had packed up an entire career and never mentioned it. Not once. Not over dinner, not during a text, not during the dozens of ordinary moments we had shared, or thought we had shared. My stomach tightened. Suddenly, every strange detail from the past several months started resurfacing. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the unexplained absences, the distant replies, the way he always seemed somewhere else, even when he was sitting beside me. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel. This wasn't a recent change. It had been happening for a long time. I simply hadn't wanted to see it. A memory flashed through my mind. 3 months earlier, I had asked whether he wanted to spend Labor Day weekend in the mountains. He barely looked up from his phone. Maybe. Another memory followed. I had waited nearly 2 hours at a restaurant after work. He claimed a client meeting ran late. I believed him immediately. There was always a reason, always an excuse, always another chance. The realization hurt more than the lie itself. I had been protecting him from questions he never intended to answer. My phone remained silent as I climbed out of the car and headed toward the apartment building. Something felt wrong, not emotionally, physically, like my body already knew what I was about to find. The hallway seemed unusually quiet. The elevator ride felt endless. When I unlocked the apartment door, I immediately noticed the difference. The air felt empty. The space looked the same at first glance. Then I saw it. The coat rack near the entrance, half empty. My heartbeat quickened. I stepped farther inside. The bookshelf in the living room, several framed photographs missing. The closet door stood slightly open. I walked toward it. Several suits were gone. A row of dress shoes had disappeared. My mouth went dry. No, no, no. I moved quickly through the apartment. Bathroom, bedroom, guest room. Each space revealed another missing piece. Drawers emptied, boxes removed, shelves cleared. It looked less like a home and more like someone quietly erasing evidence that they had ever lived there. Then I heard movement from the bedroom, the sound of a zipper closing. I froze. Tyler. I pushed open the door. He stood beside the bed with an open suitcase. Several neatly folded shirts rested inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt unbearable. Finally, I found my voice. "What is going on?" Tyler barely looked surprised to see me. "You're home early." I stared at him. "That's your first response?" He sighed. "Evelyn, don't." "Don't what?" His expression hardened. "Don't make this harder than it already is." My heart pounded. "Harder than what? Why did your company tell me you quit 3 days ago?" He zipped another suitcase. "Because I did." The casualness nearly made me dizzy. "You quit your job?" "Yes." "And you weren't planning to tell me?" "I was." "When? After you disappeared?" His jaw tightened. "I accepted another position." "Where?" "Albuquerque." I blinked. "New Mexico?" "Yes." I felt as though the room shifted beneath my feet. "You're moving to Albuquerque?" "I've already moved most of my things." I stared at the suitcase, the missing clothes, the empty shelves, the missing photographs. A terrible realization slowly formed. "You've already planned all of this?" He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. "How long?" "Several months." Several months. The words echoed through my head. Several months of lying. Several months of pretending. Several months of watching me cook dinner, ask questions, celebrate birthdays, plan anniversaries. Several months of knowing he was leaving. I swallowed hard. "Why?" Tyler finally looked directly at me. "Because this marriage isn't working anymore." The sentence felt rehearsed, like something he had practiced many times. You don't just walk away from 11 years and call it not working. He rubbed his forehead. "We're different people now." "Different people?" I laughed bitterly. "You vanished and quit your job without telling your wife. That's not becoming a different person. That's deception." His expression remained frustratingly calm. "This is exactly what I mean." "What does that mean?" "You're always focused on being right." I stared at him in disbelief. "Excuse me? You care more about work than about us." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. "I work 40 hours a week, Tyler. So do you. I pay half the bills, I clean this apartment, I buy groceries. I planned your birthday yesterday. What exactly am I neglecting?" He looked away. The conversation was clearly not going the way he wanted. Then he reached into a leather briefcase sitting beside the dresser. My stomach dropped. He removed a folder. I knew what it was before he said a word. He placed it on the bed between us. Divorce papers. The room went completely silent. I couldn't breathe for a moment. 11 years, reduced to a stack of documents. I stared at the pages. My name, his name, legal language, dates, signatures waiting to happen. Tyler folded his arms. I've already spoken with an attorney. Of course you have. Everything was arranged. The job, the move, the apartment, the attorney, every detail. Everyone knew except me. I looked up at him. Was there ever a point where you planned to tell me the truth? His eyes shifted away. That answer was enough. A few minutes later, he rolled both suitcases toward the door. No apology, no regret, no explanation, just movement, like he was late for another appointment. I stood in the middle of the apartment and watched him leave. The door closed, and just like that, 11 years disappeared down a hallway. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. The property manager. Mrs. Hartwell, we're calling regarding the lease. What lease? Mr. Carter submitted a termination request yesterday. Yesterday. Another surprise. Another decision already made. I ended the call and looked around the apartment. The silence felt different now. Not lonely, abandoned. Over the next week, I signed papers I never imagined signing. Every signature felt unreal. Every document felt like evidence from somebody else's life. Yet by the end of that week, it was official. My marriage was over. The strangest part wasn't the heartbreak, it was the uncertainty. I still didn't know who had replaced me. I still didn't know what Tyler had been hiding. I still didn't know why he had thrown away everything we built together. Then, 7 days later, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line contained only one word: proof. Chapter 3. I clicked the attachment before I could talk myself out of it. A PDF opened on my screen. At the top was a marriage certificate issued in Bernalillo County, New Mexico. My eyes immediately found Tyler's name. Then the bride's, Marissa Ellis Whitmore. For a moment, I simply stared. The document was dated 1 day after our divorce became official. 1 day. 11 years of marriage had ended, and less than 24 hours later, he was standing beside another woman exchanging vows. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. The email suddenly made sense. Proof was exactly what Tyler wanted. Proof that he had moved on. Proof that he had upgraded his life. Proof that I was supposed to feel replaced. I closed the document. A second attachment waited underneath. Several wedding photographs. I hesitated, then opened them. The first image showed Tyler smiling wider than I had seen in years. The second showed a lavish outdoor ceremony somewhere in New Mexico. The third showed him kissing his bride beneath a canopy of white flowers. The woman beside him was stunning. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect posture. The kind of beauty that looked effortless until you realized how much effort had gone into creating it. I leaned back in my chair. For several seconds, I felt nothing. Then my phone rang. Tyler, of course. I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. What do you want? His laugh carried through the speaker. Evelyn, always straight to business. You sent the email. I figured you'd want to see it. I looked back at the photographs. Congratulations. There was a brief silence. Then his voice brightened. She's incredible. I almost rolled my eyes. Good for you. No, seriously, you don't understand. Apparently, he had been waiting for an audience. The words poured out. The house is amazing. Our neighborhood is incredible. Her family has connections everywhere. I've never been happier. I listened quietly. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. Every detail felt carefully selected, like a salesman presenting a product, except the product was his new life. And my new position is already paying more than Summit Horizon ever did. That's great, Tyler. It is. He paused, then added the line he truly wanted me to hear. I finally feel appreciated. The statement stung more than I wanted to admit, not because I believed it, because I remembered all the years I had spent supporting him, the late nights, the financial stress, the promotions that never came, the frustrations he carried home. I had stood beside him through every disappointment, yet somehow I was now the person who failed to appreciate him. I remained silent. Eventually, Tyler continued, "And we're expecting." I frowned. "What?" His voice filled with pride. "Marissa is pregnant." The room suddenly felt very still. "How far along?" 3 months. 3 months. The number echoed inside my head. I grabbed a pen from my desk and instinctively looked toward the calendar hanging beside my computer. 3 months. The calculation happened automatically. 3 months placed the beginning of the pregnancy long before our divorce papers were finalized, possibly long before Tyler packed his suitcases, possibly long before he ever admitted our marriage was ending. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, the timeline looked very different. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the emotional distance, the unexplained meetings. A relationship already existed. This wasn't a new beginning. It was the continuation of something hidden. "You're still there?" Tyler asked. "Yeah." "Everything okay?" The irony almost made me laugh. "You should probably focus on your wife." He chuckled. "I just thought you deserved to know." No, he wanted me to know. That was different. A few minutes later, the conversation ended. I set my phone down and stared at the wedding photos again. Marissa Ellis Whitmore. The name bothered me, not because I knew her, because it felt familiar, like a song you haven't heard in years, like a face seen somewhere long ago. I enlarged one of the photographs. The bride smiled directly into the camera. Beautiful, confident, polished, yet something about her eyes tugged at my memory. I couldn't place it. That evening, curiosity got the better of me. I searched her name online. The results appeared immediately. Social media profiles, magazine features from local charity events, gallery openings, fundraisers, photos from expensive vacations, photos beside luxury cars, photos beside influential people. The life looked perfect. Maybe too perfect. I clicked through dozens of images, the same smile, the same elegant appearance, the same carefully curated existence. Hours passed. I should have stopped. Instead, I kept searching. Something continued bothering me. The feeling intensified every time I saw another photograph. I've seen her before. I just couldn't remember where. Several days later, I found myself scrolling through older posts. Most recent photos looked professionally edited. The older ones felt more natural, less polished, less controlled. Then I stopped. A photograph taken years earlier filled my screen, not because the image revealed anything dramatic, because of her expression. Those eyes, that smile. Recognition struck so suddenly, I almost dropped my phone. No. Impossible. I opened another photo, then another. The feeling grew stronger. The face looked different, but something underneath remained the same. The shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head while smiling, the nervous posture she never completely abandoned. I knew this woman, somewhere, somehow. I grabbed my phone and called the only person who might know. Lana Mitchell answered after the second ring. "Evelyn, everything okay?" "I need to ask you something." "That sounds serious." "Do you remember a girl from high school named Marissa Whitmore?" Silence. Then a surprised laugh. "Wow, that's a name I haven't heard in forever." My pulse quickened. "So you remember her?" "Of course I do." I sat forward. "Tell me everything." Another pause. Then Lana spoke slowly. "Why are you asking about Marissa?" I looked at the wedding photograph glowing on my laptop screen. Because for the first time since opening Tyler's email, I was beginning to suspect that Tyler's perfect new wife wasn't a stranger at all. And several hundred miles away, months after disappearing from my life, Tyler Carter called me unexpectedly one evening. The panic in his voice was unlike anything I had ever heard before. Chapter 4. I almost didn't answer. For several seconds, I watched Tyler's name flash across my screen, while memories fought with resentment inside my head. Eventually, curiosity won. I accepted the call. Hello? For a moment, all I heard was breathing, not the confident voice from months earlier, not the man who had proudly described his perfect wife, perfect neighborhood, and perfect future. Just breathing. Evelyn. Something was wrong. What happened? Another pause, then a sentence I never expected to hear. I need your help. I leaned back in my chair. The irony was almost unbelievable. You spent months lying to me, disappeared, divorced me, remarried immediately, and now you're asking for help? I know. His voice cracked. I know how this sounds. For the first time since our marriage ended, Tyler sounded afraid. Not guilty, not embarrassed. Afraid. I didn't answer. Eventually, he continued. Our daughter was born 3 weeks ago. I remembered the pregnancy announcement, the pride in his voice, the certainty. What about her? Another silence. Then he spoke quietly. She doesn't look like either of us. I frowned. What? She doesn't look like me. His breathing became uneven. She doesn't look like Marissa either. I rubbed my forehead. Tyler, babies change. I know that. No, I don't think you do. I do. His response came instantly, too quickly, like he'd repeated the conversation dozens of times already. You haven't seen her. Something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. What exactly are you trying to tell me? I don't know. That answer frightened him more than any explanation could have. For the next 15 minutes, Tyler talked while I listened. The story came out in fragments. He wasn't sleeping. He checked the baby constantly. He stared at her face for hours. Every day, he became more convinced something was wrong. I know it sounds crazy. It does? I look at her and his voice faded. You just what? I don't recognize either of us. A week later, he called again, then again, then again. The conversations became repetitive, obsessive. Every detail led back to the same subject, the baby, her eyes, her hair, her face. Eventually, I realized Tyler wasn't looking for answers. He was looking for reassurance, and he wasn't finding it. Then came the call that changed everything. Evelyn. His voice sounded exhausted. I got the DNA results. I sat down immediately. And? A long pause. She's mine. No relief followed the statement. No happiness, no peace, only confusion. The test confirmed it. 100%. Then what is the problem? I don't know. He sounded defeated. That's the problem. Several days later, he asked if we could meet. Every instinct told me to refuse. Instead, I agreed. Not for him, for myself. I wanted closure. We met at a quiet coffee shop halfway between our neighborhoods. When Tyler walked inside, I barely recognized him. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. His shoulders slumped. The confidence that once filled every room had disappeared. He looked older, tired, defeated. He sat across from me. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, I broke the silence. You look terrible. A weak smile appeared. Thanks. I'm serious. I know. He stared into his coffee, then pulled out his phone. Without saying a word, he placed it on the table. A photograph filled the screen. The baby. I looked closer, then closer again. A little girl, large eyes, dark curls, soft features, beautiful, completely innocent, and completely unlike the glamorous image Tyler had spent months describing. I returned the phone. She's beautiful. His expression tightened. You see it too. See what? That she doesn't look like us. I sighed. Tyler. No, be honest. I studied him carefully. Then something unexpected happened. A memory surfaced. Not from my marriage, from high school. A yearbook, faces, names, teenagers trying desperately to become someone else. I suddenly remembered Lana's voice from our conversation weeks earlier. Do you remember what Marissa looked like back then? At the time, I hadn't thought much about it. Now I did. I looked at Tyler, then at the baby again, then back at Tyler. A realization slowly formed. Have you shown Marissa the old yearbook? His head snapped upward. What yearbook? The one from high school. His confusion deepened. What does that have to do with anything? Everything. A few days later, I drove home and climbed into the storage closet where old boxes collected dust. It took nearly an hour to find it, the yearbook. When I opened it, time seemed to fold backward. There was Lana, there was me, there was Marissa, and there was Tyler. I stared at his photograph. Curly hair, acne across his cheeks, crooked teeth, a completely different version of the man who now spent thousands maintaining his appearance. Several pages later, I found Marissa, quiet, shy, avoiding the camera. Her features were dramatically different from the elegant woman smiling from wedding photographs. The years had transformed both of them. Or rather, surgery had. Cosmetic procedures, orthodontics, dermatology, money, image, reinvention. I suddenly understood what Tyler was unable to see. The next evening, he called again. I answered immediately. I found something. What? The yearbook. Silence. What yearbook? Our yearbook. I explained, slowly, patiently. At first he resisted, then confusion replaced resistance, then realization replaced confusion. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I said the words that changed everything. You can change a face. Silence. You can straighten teeth. More silence. You can alter features. I heard him breathing. But DNA doesn't care. Nothing. The baby isn't showing you the people you've become. My voice softened. She's showing you where you came from. For a long time, Tyler said nothing. Then I heard something unexpected. Crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears from a man whose carefully constructed reality had finally cracked. After the call ended, I stared at Tyler's contact information on my screen. Then I opened the settings menu. Block caller, confirm. The number disappeared. For the first time since my marriage ended, the silence that followed felt peaceful. The weeks that followed felt different from anything I had experienced during my marriage. Not happier, not immediately, just quieter. For years, my life had revolved around anticipating someone else's needs. I worried about Tyler's schedule, Tyler's moods, Tyler's ambitions, Tyler's disappointments. Even when I wasn't physically with him, part of my attention always belonged to him. Then one day, I realized something strange. I hadn't thought about him for nearly an entire afternoon. That tiny discovery felt more liberating than I can explain. Several months later, I accepted a transfer opportunity within my company and moved to Boulder. The apartment wasn't large. In fact, it was considerably smaller than the place Tyler and I once shared, but it was mine. A sunny balcony overlooked a quiet neighborhood lined with trees. On weekends, I drank coffee outside and watched people walk their dogs. Nobody rushed me. Nobody ignored me. Nobody made me feel invisible. For the first time in years, peace stopped feeling unfamiliar. Healing wasn't dramatic. There was no magical morning when I woke up completely transformed. It happened in small moments. I stopped checking my phone before bed. I stopped wondering where Tyler was. I stopped replaying old conversations, searching for answers. Eventually, I reduced my hours at work, not because I had to, because I wanted to. For 11 years, I had postponed parts of myself while prioritizing a marriage that no longer existed. Now I enrolled in a weekend painting class. At first, I was terrible. My trees looked like broccoli. My mountains resembled giant blue triangles. The instructor tried very hard to not laugh. One Saturday afternoon, she finally gave up. Those trees are definitely unique. I laughed harder than I had in months. Unique is a polite word. It's better than terrible. Is it? Marginally. For the first time in a very long time, laughter felt natural, not forced, not performed, real. I also reconnected with friends I had gradually drifted away from, including Lana. One evening, we met for dinner downtown. Halfway through the meal, she lowered her fork and looked at me carefully. "You seem different." I smiled. Good different or scary different? Healthy different? The answer surprised me, because she was right. The constant tension I had carried for years was gone. Not completely, but enough that other people could notice. A few months later, I met Nathan Brooks again. Technically, it wasn't our first meeting. We had attended the same high school and crossed paths at several reunions over the years. This time was different. There were no expectations, no pressure, no dramatic romance, just conversation. One afternoon, we happened to run into each other at a bookstore. He held up a novel and frowned. "I think I've read this already." "That's usually a sign." I bought it again. I laughed. "You spent money on a book you already own?" "I'd like to blame stress." "Can you?" "No." His honesty made me smile. We started having coffee occasionally, then lunch, then long conversations. Nathan listened more than he talked. When I spoke, he paid attention. When I finished, he remembered details. The contrast felt impossible to ignore, not because Nathan was extraordinary, because basic respect had become unfamiliar. One evening, we sat outside a small cafe watching the sunset. He glanced toward me. "You know something?" "What?" "You apologize too much." I blinked. "I do not." "You literally apologized while saying that." I opened my mouth, then stopped, because he was right. Years of walking on emotional eggshells had trained me to shrink myself. Nathan never demanded that. His presence felt calm, simple, safe. And for now, that was enough. Nearly 2 years passed. Life continued moving forward. Then one evening, my phone rang. "Lana." I answered immediately. "Hey? You sitting down?" I laughed. "That never sounds good." "It isn't." Something in her voice shifted. "What happened?" She hesitated, then delivered the kind of update I once spent months fantasizing about hearing. "Tyler cheated." The statement hung in the air. I stared through the window toward the mountains. "What?" Apparently, several times. For a moment, I didn't know how to react. Shock, disbelief, sadness. None felt exactly right. Eventually, I asked the obvious question. "Marissa knows?" "Oh, she knows." Lana sighed. "She hired a divorce attorney last month." I closed my eyes. The irony was almost unbearable. The marriage Tyler destroyed ours to create was collapsing for the exact same reason. Another choice. Another betrayal, another lie. Yet instead of satisfaction, I felt something unexpected. Exhaustion. Because the pattern was so predictable. People rarely escape themselves. Months later, another update arrived. The divorce proceedings were becoming increasingly hostile. Arguments over property, arguments over custody, arguments over money. The perfect life Tyler advertised years ago was unraveling piece by piece. Meanwhile, the person I thought about most wasn't Tyler. It wasn't Marissa either. It was their daughter, Ava. The little girl neither parent seemed prepared to protect from their own insecurities. According to Lana, she had become quieter as she grew older, more observant, more cautious. Children always notice more than adults realize. That hurt my heart, because none of what happened was her fault. She didn't choose the lies. She didn't choose the affairs. She didn't choose the expectations placed upon her before she could even speak. She simply inherited the consequences. One evening, I sat alone on my balcony, watching sunlight disappear behind the mountains. A thought came to me. People misunderstand karma. They imagine dramatic moments, public humiliation, instant justice, perfect revenge. Real karma rarely works that way. More often, it arrives quietly. One selfish decision, then another, until eventually a person wakes up surrounded by consequences they created themselves. Tyler got what he thought he wanted: a new wife, a wealthy family, a larger house, a fresh start. Yet none of it solved the emptiness he carried with him. Marissa achieved the appearance she spent years chasing: beauty, status, admiration. Still, she never found peace. And me? I lost my marriage. I lost the future I believed I was building. But somewhere in that loss, I found myself again. If someone asked whether I forgave Tyler, I honestly wouldn't know how to answer. Not because forgiveness is impossible, because the question no longer matters. Forgiveness isn't what freed me. Acceptance did. The moment I stopped defining my life by what happened to me, I regained control of it. The truth is that the happiest ending wasn't seeing Tyler fail. It wasn't watching Marissa struggle. It wasn't witnessing their marriage collapse. The happiest ending was discovering I could build a meaningful life without either of them. Years ago, I thought losing my marriage would destroy me. Instead, it introduced me to a stronger version of myself. And looking back now, I finally understand something I could never have understood back then. The real victory was never revenge. The real victory was moving forward. If you found yourself in Evelyn's position, would you have cut all contact immediately, or would you have kept trying to save the marriage a little longer? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories about betrayal, karma, resilience, and second chances speak to you, stay with us for the next journey.